Welcome to True Crime Case Files. In this episode, a stepson's secret affair spirals into obsession and a grisly murder. Let's dive into the details. Maria Rodarte-Sullivan was a vibrant 38-year-old woman known for her artistic talents and kind-hearted nature. She lived in Summerville, South Carolina, a small town known for its charming downtown and the annual Flower Town Festival. Maria worked as a freelance artist, creating beautiful paintings and sculptures that she sold at local art fairs and galleries. Maria lived with her husband David Sullivan and her 18-year-old stepson Tyler. David was a retired naval officer, and they had been married for 10 years. Despite their 20-year age difference, Maria and David were deeply in love. They met at a local art show where Maria's work was being displayed. David was immediately drawn to her creativity and passion for life. Maria tried her best to create a happy and harmonious home. She balanced her freelance work with managing the household and caring for Tyler. She was a motherly figure to Tyler, who had lost his biological mother a few years earlier. Maria and Tyler's relationship was said to be strained, but she remained hopeful that they could eventually bond. In her free time, Maria enjoyed reading and gardening. She was a big fan of classic literature, often quoting Jane Austen and the Bronte sisters. Her garden was filled with vibrant flowers, a testament to her love for nature. Maria was also active in the local community, volunteering at the Summerville Public Library and participating in neighborhood events. In the days leading up to her death, Maria was excited about a new art project she was working on, a series of sculptures inspired by the local wildlife and landscapes of South Carolina. Maria planned to showcase these pieces at the upcoming Flower Town Festival. She was also looking forward to a small family getaway she had planned, hoping it would help mend the strained relationship between her and Tyler. Maria's friends described her as charismatic and friendly. She had a close-knit social circle and was always willing to lend a helping hand. Her friends recalled how Maria would often host dinner parties, cooking delicious meals and creating a warm, welcoming atmosphere. Despite the challenges in her life, Maria remained optimistic and full of dreams. She hoped to open her own art gallery someday and inspire others with her work. Tragically, her dreams were cut short by a brutal and senseless act of violence. Maria's life was a testament to her resilience and creativity, and her loss was deeply felt by all who knew her. On the morning of September 12, 2012, Summerville was just waking up. It was a cool, clear day with the sun shining brightly. Around 8:30 a.m., Maria Rodarte-Sullivan's neighbor, Lilith Carter, walked over to the Sullivan house. Lilith, who was 25 years old, lived next door. She often visited Maria to discuss her true crime novel, which she was working on based on real-life events. Lilith knocked on the door, but no one answered. She found this odd because Maria was usually up early working in her art studio. The studio was a small separate building in the backyard. Lilith decided to check there. As she approached the studio, she noticed the door was slightly open. When Lilith entered, she was greeted by a horrific scene. Maria was lying on the floor, covered in blood. The room was in chaos, with broken sculptures and shattered glass everywhere. Maria's body showed signs of a violent struggle. Lilith was shocked and horrified. Her hands trembled as she quickly dialed 911 on her cell phone. The 911 operator, calming Lilith as best they could, instructed her to stay outside and wait for the police. Lilith, still in shock, followed the instructions. She stood in the yard, staring at the studio, trying to process what she had just seen. The police arrived within minutes. As they began their investigation, they noted the heavy sculpture near Maria's body. It was clear this was the murder weapon used to inflict multiple blunt force trauma injuries. The amount of blood and the state of the studio indicated a frenzied attack. Lilith was interviewed by the police. She was still shaken but managed to provide a clear account of her morning. She described her relationship with Maria and her reasons for visiting her. Detailed observations helped the investigators piece together the timeline of events leading up to the discovery of Maria's body. The discovery of Maria Rodarte-Sullivan's body marked the beginning of a complex and emotional investigation. Her friends and neighbors were left in shock, struggling to understand how such a brutal crime could happen in their peaceful community. When the police arrived at the Sullivan house on the morning of September 12, 2012, they knew they had a serious crime on their hands. It was a sunny day in Summerville, and the peaceful neighborhood was quickly disturbed by the flashing lights and sirens of police cars. Detective Martin Coco, a seasoned investigator known for his thoroughness, led the team. With him was Officer Julia Montez, who was respected for her calm and methodical approach. They had both seen many crime scenes, but the brutality of this one stood out. The art studio where Maria's body was found was a small building in the backyard. As they entered, the detectives were met with a gruesome sight. Blood was splattered on the walls, and the floor was covered with broken sculptures and shattered glass. The room looked like a scene from a horror movie, a far cry from the creative space it usually was. Maria's body lay on the floor, showing signs of a violent struggle. It was clear that she had been beaten to death with a heavy sculpture found nearby. The sculpture was stained with blood, indicating it was the murder weapon. Maria had multiple blunt force trauma injuries, suggesting a frenzied and brutal attack. The police immediately began their investigation. They cordoned off the area to preserve evidence. Detective Coco and Officer Montez carefully examined the crime scene, looking for any clues. They used advanced forensic techniques, including fingerprint dusting and blood pattern analysis, to piece together what had happened. The detectives worked quickly but meticulously. They collected samples of blood and hair for DNA analysis and took photographs of the scene from every angle. They also found a few items that seemed out of place, like a torn piece of cloth and a broken piece of jewelry, which they bagged as evidence. Outside, neighbors gathered, watching with a mix of fear and curiosity. The police asked anyone who had seen or heard anything unusual to come forward. They also conducted door-to-door interviews to gather more information about the hours leading up to the discovery of Maria's body. As the day went on, the police presence grew. Additional officers arrived to help with the investigation, and the media started to gather, drawn by the shocking nature of the crime. News reporters from local stations like WCI and the Post and Courier began reporting live from the scene, adding to the growing sense of urgency. By the end of the day, the police had gathered a substantial amount of evidence, but many questions remained. Who could have done this, and why? Detective Coco and Officer Montez knew they had a long road ahead, but they were determined to find justice for Maria. David Sullivan, Maria's husband, was the first suspect the police investigated. David, who was 58 years old, had a disciplined and stoic personality. Shaped by his years of service in the Navy, he married Maria 10 years ago, providing her with stability and support. Despite his stern exterior, David was deeply in love with Maria and very protective of his family. On September 12, 2012, after the police discovered Maria's body, they brought David in for questioning. Detective Martin Coco and Officer Julia Montez conducted the interview. David appeared calm but was clearly shaken by the news of his wife's death. He told the detectives that he had been away on a business trip, staying at a Hampton Inn in Boston. He provided hotel receipts and a confirmation of his check-in and check-out times to back up his alibi. David's interview lasted several hours. The detectives asked him about his relationship with Maria and any possible enemies she might have had. David spoke about the tensions between Maria and his son Tyler. He mentioned that Tyler had been acting out since the death of his biological mother and struggled to accept Maria as a mother figure. David believed that despite these challenges, the family would eventually reconcile. The police also searched the Sullivan home for additional evidence. They went through David's belongings and searched his car but found nothing suspicious. They interviewed David's colleagues and checked his phone records, all of which confirmed his alibi. Throughout the investigation, David maintained his composure. However, the strain was visible. He expressed his grief and disbelief that someone could harm Maria. He was cooperative with the police and provided them with any information they requested. Meanwhile, the local news outlets such as WCI and the Post and Courier reported on the investigation. Neighbors and friends of the Sullivans were shocked to hear that David was a suspect. Many described him as a kind and loving husband who would never harm his wife. Despite his strong alibi, the police continued to investigate David to ensure nothing was overlooked. They re-examined the crime scene and cross-checked all the details of his alibi. Detective Coco and Officer Montez wanted to be thorough, leaving no stone unturned. As days passed, it became clear that David was not involved in Maria's murder. The focus of the investigation shifted to other potential suspects. While David was cleared, the pain of losing Maria and being under suspicion was a heavy burden he had to bear. On September 15, 2012, just 3 days after the discovery of Maria's body, Summerville was covered in a light drizzle. The gray skies matched the somber mood in the town. Around noon, while reviewing the evidence collected from the crime scene, Detective Martin Coco noticed something unusual. Hidden among Maria's art supplies in her studio, there were dozens of letters. These were not just any letters but sexually explicit love letters exchanged between Maria and someone else. Detective Coco and Officer Julia Montez carefully read through the letters. The content revealed a secret affair between Maria and an unidentified individual. The letters spoke graphically of secret sex acts and deep conflicting emotions. This discovery was a significant breakthrough in the case and suggested a possible motive for the murder. Detective Coco called for a meeting with the entire investigative team. They discussed the contents of the letters and the implications. The team knew they had to identify the other person involved in the affair to understand the full context and potential motives. Officer Montez led the effort to gather more information. She visited Maria's close friends and neighbors, asking if anyone knew about the affair. Many were shocked and had no idea Maria was involved with someone other than her husband, David. The news quickly spread through the small, very conservative Southern community, creating a buzz of gossip and speculation. Meanwhile, forensic experts analyzed the letters for fingerprints and DNA evidence. They also checked Maria's phone records and email history to find clues about her secret lover. The investigation was thorough, and every detail was scrutinized. On the same rainy afternoon, while examining Maria's phone, the detectives found a series of explicit text messages and call logs that led them to suspect Tyler, Maria's 18-year-old stepson. The messages hinted at a strained and complicated sexual relationship between Maria and Tyler. Some of the texts were cryptic, while others were more explicit and graphically described their sexual relationship. Detective Coco and Officer Montez were shocked by this new revelation. Tyler had always been seen as a troubled teenager, but the extent of his relationship with Maria was unexpected. The detectives knew they had to approach this delicately to get to the truth. The discovery of the love letters and text messages shifted the focus of the investigation. The police now had a clearer direction, and the pieces of the puzzle were slowly coming together. They prepared to interrogate Tyler again, this time with new compelling evidence that could unlock the secrets behind Maria's tragic death. For true crime case solvers interested in more real-life murder mysteries, be sure to like and subscribe to our channel. Do you have any thoughts about this case or have a case of your own you'd like us to investigate? Leave us a comment. Stay safe, true crime case fans. Tyler Sullivan, Maria's 18-year-old stepson, became the focus of the investigation after the discovery of the love letters and text messages. Tyler was a troubled teenager still struggling with the death of his biological mother and the arrival of Maria into his life. He often acted out, showing signs of resentment towards Maria for taking his mother's place. Despite this, he was intelligent and ambitious with a passion for music. He spent hours playing his guitar, dreaming of becoming a famous musician. On September 16, 2012, Tyler was brought in for questioning. Detective Martin Coco and Officer Julia Montez conducted the interview. Tyler appeared nervous but tried to remain calm. The detectives began by asking him about his relationship with Maria. Tyler admitted that their relationship was strained but denied any involvement in her murder. When the detectives presented the love letters, Tyler's demeanor changed. He became visibly upset and defensive. He confessed to the affair, explaining that they started having sex about a year ago. Tyler said he became obsessed with Maria, believing that they could be together if his father, David, were out of the picture. However, Maria tried to end the affair and focus on her marriage, which frustrated Tyler. The detectives pressed Tyler for more details. They asked him about the night of Maria's murder. Tyler claimed he was at a friend's house watching movies. The police checked his alibi, but it was weak and lacked concrete evidence. His friend Jake said Tyler was with him but couldn't remember specific details or times. Tyler's reaction to the interrogation was a mix of anger and fear. He was defensive and argumentative, denying any involvement in the murder while expressing his frustration over Maria ending the affair. The detectives noted his conflicting emotions, which seemed to oscillate between sadness and anger. While Tyler was a prime suspect, the police needed more evidence to link him directly to the crime. They continued to analyze the physical evidence from the crime scene and cross-referenced it with Tyler's statements. The detectives also reviewed security camera footage from the neighborhood, hoping to find any inconsistencies in Tyler's alibi. The investigation into Tyler was intense and thorough. Detective Thompson and Officer Montez were determined to uncover the truth. They knew Tyler had a motive, but they needed solid evidence to prove his involvement. The love letters and text messages were crucial, but they had to build a strong case. The investigation was far from over, and the detectives continued to piece together the puzzle. Tyler remained a key figure in the case, and the police were determined to find justice for Maria. Lilybeth Carter, the Sullivans' 25-year-old neighbor, became another person of interest in the investigation. Lilybeth lived next door and frequently visited the Sullivan house. She had a keen interest in true crime stories and was working on a novel based on real-life events. Lilybeth was known for her observant nature and was often seen taking notes and photos around the neighborhood. On September 17, 2012, the police brought Lilybeth in for questioning. Detective Martin Coco and Officer Julia Montez conducted the interview. Lilybeth appeared calm and cooperative. She explained that she had a passion for writing and was fascinated by true crime. She often visited Maria to discuss her novel and get feedback on her writing. The detectives asked Lilybeth about the morning she discovered Maria's body. Lilybeth recounted the events in detail, describing how she found the studio door slightly open and discovered Maria lying on the floor. She spoke about her shock and horror and how she immediately called 911. The detectives noted that Lilybeth's account was consistent with the initial report. As the questioning continued, the detectives probed deeper into Lilybeth's relationship with the Sullivans. Lilybeth admitted that she often observed the family dynamics, noting the tension between Maria and Tyler. She also mentioned that she had seen Tyler acting suspiciously on several occasions but didn't think much of it at the time. The detectives asked Lilybeth about her interest in true crime and whether it influenced her actions. Lilybeth explained that her interest was purely academic and creative. She was writing a novel and used her observations to create realistic characters and scenarios. She denied any involvement in Maria's murder and insisted that she was just a concerned neighbor. Lilybeth's calm and cooperative demeanor made it difficult for the detectives to determine if she was hiding anything. They decided to search her house for any evidence that might link her to the crime. They found several notebooks filled with detailed observations about the neighborhood and the Sullivans but nothing directly incriminating. Despite her cooperation, Lilybeth remained a person of interest. The detectives continued to monitor her closely, looking for any inconsistencies in her story. They also reviewed the security footage from the neighborhood, hoping to find any evidence that could either implicate or clear her. As the investigation into Lilybeth continued, the detectives faced the challenge of distinguishing between her genuine interest in true crime and any potential involvement in Maria's death. The complexity of the case deepened, but the police remained committed to finding the truth and bringing justice for Maria. On September 20, 2012, the investigation took a significant turn. Detective Martin Coco and Officer Julia Montez had gathered enough evidence to identify the murderer. The evidence pointed to Tyler Sullivan, Maria's 18-year-old stepson. Tyler's conflicting emotions and erratic behavior had raised suspicions from the start, but it was the discovery of his fingerprints on the murder weapon that sealed his fate. Tyler was known to be a troubled teenager. He struggled with the recent death of his biological mother and resented Maria for taking her place. Despite his intelligence and passion for music, Tyler's feelings for Maria had evolved into a dangerous mix of hatred and desire. When Maria confronted him about his failing grades and her decision to end their secret affair, Tyler snapped. In a fit of rage and obsession, he attacked her with a heavy sculpture from her studio. The detectives had pieced together the events of that fateful day. Tyler had been at the house, waiting for the right moment. When Maria entered the studio, he followed her. The confrontation escalated quickly, and in his fury, Tyler grabbed the sculpture and struck Maria multiple times, leading to her death. With the evidence in hand, the police prepared to arrest Tyler. On the evening of September 20th, they arrived at the Sullivan home. Tyler was in his room listening to music on his iPod when the officers entered. Tyler seemed surprised but didn't resist arrest. He was handcuffed and taken to the police station for processing. David Sullivan, Tyler's father, was devastated by the news. He couldn't believe that his son was capable of such a brutal act. The family was torn apart by the revelation, and the community was equally shocked. Neighbors and friends who had known Tyler as a quiet, troubled teen now saw him in a completely different light. The police detailed the evidence during a press conference, explaining how Tyler's obsession with Maria and his inability to control his emotions led to the murder. The discovery of the sexually explicit letters and Tyler's fingerprints on the murder weapon were critical pieces of the puzzle that helped solve the case. As Tyler was taken away, his reaction was a mix of anger and resignation. He knew the evidence against him was overwhelming, and there was no escape from the consequences of his actions. Maria's friends and family were relieved that the murderer had been caught, but the pain of losing Maria remained. The arrest of Tyler Sullivan brought some closure to the case, but the journey to justice was far from over. The next step was the trial, where the full extent of Tyler's actions and motives would be revealed. The trial of Tyler Sullivan began on November 5, 2012, in Summerville, South Carolina. The courtroom was filled with reporters, friends, and family members, all eager to hear the details of the case. The prosecution was led by Assistant District Attorney James Bliver, a seasoned lawyer known for his tenacity and thoroughness. He was 45 years old with a stern demeanor that commanded respect. Bliver argued that Tyler's obsession with Maria, coupled with his anger over her ending their affair, led him to commit the brutal murder. He presented the love letters, text messages, and the forensic evidence linking Tyler to the crime. The prosecution's case was solid, painting a clear picture of Tyler's motive and actions. The defense was handled by public defender Sarah Jane Lemon, a compassionate and determined attorney who had been practicing law for over 20 years. She was 42 years old and known for her dedication to her clients. Lemon argued that Tyler was a troubled teenager who had been deeply affected by his mother's death and was struggling with mental health issues. She claimed that Tyler's actions were not premeditated but a result of emotional turmoil and confusion. Throughout the trial, the emotional toll on Maria's family was evident. Her husband, David Sullivan, sat in the front row, his face etched with grief and disbelief. Friends and family members wept quietly as they listened to the details of Maria's tragic death. After several weeks of testimony and evidence, the jury deliberated for 2 days. On December 3, 2012, they returned with a verdict. Tyler Sullivan was found guilty of second-degree murder. The courtroom was silent as the judge read the verdict. Tyler showed little emotion, his face blank as he listened to his fate. The sentencing took place on December 10, 2012. Tyler was sentenced to 25 years in prison without the possibility of parole. The judge stated that while Tyler's actions were driven by emotional distress, the brutality of the crime warranted a severe punishment. The sentence aimed to provide justice for Maria and her family while acknowledging Tyler's troubled background. Maria's family had mixed reactions to the sentence. Some felt it was too lenient given the nature of the crime, while others believed it was a fair balance between justice and compassion for Tyler's mental state. The community of Summerville was left to grapple with the aftermath of the tragedy, hoping to find some sense of closure. The trial and sentencing of Tyler Sullivan were widely covered by local media, including WCI and the Post and Courier. The case served as a somber reminder of the impact of emotional and mental health issues and the devastating consequences they can have. After Tyler Sullivan was sentenced to 25 years in prison, life in Summerville, South Carolina, began to slowly move forward. The trial had been a traumatic experience for everyone involved, leaving lasting impacts on the community. David Sullivan, Maria's husband, struggled to cope with the loss of his wife and the imprisonment of his son. He took a leave of absence from his job and sought counseling to deal with his grief and the overwhelming sense of betrayal. Friends and neighbors provided support, but David often felt isolated. He decided to move to Charleston to start fresh, away from the painful memories in Summerville. Tyler's incarceration was a difficult adjustment for him as well. He was sent to a state correctional facility where he began receiving psychological counseling. The prison system offered educational programs, and Tyler enrolled in classes to complete his high school education and began studying music theory, still clinging to his dream of becoming a musician someday. Lilybeth Carter, the neighbor and true crime enthusiast, was deeply affected by the entire ordeal. She continued to write her novel, now incorporating the harrowing experience she had lived through. The local media, including WCI and the Post and Courier, featured interviews with Lilybeth discussing her perspective on the case. Despite the unwanted attention, Lilybeth remained focused on her writing, finding solace in her creative work. Detective Martin Coco and Officer Julia Montes, the lead investigators, received commendations for their diligent work in solving the case. The success of their investigation reinforced their commitment to justice and the importance of thorough police work. The case also highlighted the need for increased support for mental health issues, both within families and the broader community. Life in Summerville gradually returned to a semblance of normalcy, but the memory of Maria Rodarte-Sullivan and the tragic events that unfolded remained etched in the hearts of those who knew her. The town's resolve to support mental health initiatives and honor Maria's legacy became a lasting tribute to her life. Thank you for listening to this episode of True Crime Case Files. The tragic story of Maria Rodarte-Sullivan reminds us of the complexities of human relationships and the dark paths obsession can lead us down. Join us next time as we explore another case in our pursuit of truth and justice. Stay safe.